and "Don't Hitchhike Anymore Tonight" by Sweet Mercy. I was a pretty brave person when I was younger, or maybe I had that sense of invincibility that comes with youth. I'd survived through some pretty bad things. I'd been sexually assaulted, 2 house fires, and I grew up in a house that I swear was haunted. Not in that Disney way either. I'm talking torture chamber in the basement and strange things going on. Anyway, looking back on it, all of what I went through made me feel like I was kind of invincible. Or maybe I just assumed that I'd gotten all of the bad stuff out of the way and nothing else was gonna go wrong. I learned to know better. So when I was 17, I didn't have a driver's license. I walked most places. Occasionally I'd catch rides with friends, and less occasionally I would hitchhike. This night in question was one of those where I decided that it'd be best to hitchhike. I had worked late and I was too exhausted to walk. Now, most of the time when I'd catch a ride, I wouldn't get in the car with a lone man, only a woman, or very rarely a man with his wife or girlfriend or kids in the car. This night though, cars were few and far between, and it was really cold. I was giving up on the idea of being able to get a ride. However, eventually, there was one car that pulled up. I took a good look at the guy and figured that I could easily take him if he tried anything. He was on the slender side. He had some strange frailness about him, even though he looked fairly healthy. I then got into the car after we agreed upon a destination. We exchanged names. I then warmed my fingers in front of the heating vent. He spoke quietly, asking a few questions along the lines of, was I local and how did I like living here? He said he'd only been here a couple of months, but found it beautiful and hoped that he could find happiness here. That comment struck me as a little odd, but I brushed it off. It began to snow and the roads got slippery really quick, so he slowed right down and kept his eyes straight on the windshield, driving silently. It was okay. Small talk was never really my thing. About 10 minutes later, I noticed that there was a car at the intersection we were approaching and it seemed to be sliding. I said, "Watch out." In response, he then immediately slammed onto the gas, shooting through the intersection and bursting out with, "Don't ever scream at me." Needless to say, I was taken back. I said, "Look, this is close enough, just pull over here so I can get out." He didn't seem to hear me. Did you hear me? I said pull over and let me out." I got no response. He just stared straight ahead, driving faster now, even though it began to snow more. To say I was scared doesn't seem to cover the depth of fear that began to arise in me. I didn't know if I would be able to stay quiet or speak, but I was sure that I was going to get out of there if he had one more burst. After about a mile, he began to mumble under his breath. I couldn't quite make out what he was saying though. I assumed he was speaking to me, so I said, I couldn't hear you." He began to speak quietly and rapidly, saying things like, "You're always shouting at me. I do not appreciate it. How many times do I have to tell you? What's wrong with you? Why don't you stop doing this? You don't listen." "No, well, I'm listening to you now. Do you hear that?" I was at a complete loss. I didn't know what to say in response. I was pretty scared, so I just didn't say anything at all. I contemplated jumping out of the car, but I had mixed ideas because I realised the door locks were missing. There was simply a hole where it should have been. I started crying and debating with myself whether I should cause an accident. I planned to do so by grabbing the steering wheel and hoping for the best. He then suddenly looked at me for the first time since I'd gotten into the car. He blinked several times rapidly, then slowed the car down, pulling into a gas station. I waited to see if he'd unlocked the doors, not wanting to say anything to set him off. After a minute or two, he quietly said, "I think you better get out of here," and he hit the button to open the doors. I wasn't about to hesitate. I jumped out of the car as if it were on fire. I was about to turn and walk into the gas station when he called my name. He looked so sad and devastated. He He apologised. He said sorry if he had frightened me and that he would never have harmed me, and he asked if I'd be okay to get home. I said I would and closed the door. He began pulling out of the gas station, but then suddenly stopped. He just sat there for a couple of moments with his head down. I froze, wondering what in the world he was up to, and I was about to run to the gas station, but he then opened his window and yelled at me, waving something in his hand. My hat. I left it on his seat. I was pretty hesitant to go back up to him, but decided I wanted my hat back, so I very slowly approached him. He handed it to me and apologised again. I didn't know what else to say, so I just said, thanks. I watched as he then drove off, making sure that he was out of sight before moving on, so he didn't know which direction I was heading in. As I walked, I went to put my hat back on and out fell a piece of paper. Folded into the piece of paper was a $100 bill, saying, "I'm sorry, please take a cab and don't hitchhike anymore tonight." I didn't. In fact, it was the last time that I ever hitchhiked again. Come on, I really want to give you a ride by MLVK. This happened a few years back. I was in my mid-20s, fit and an avid runner. I spent a good part of my summer at my dad's cottage out in the middle of nowhere. It was absolutely gorgeous for running through. So it was on one of those overcast, very hot and humid summer afternoons, and I was out for a long run. It was insanely hot and it had a good chance of thunder or rain in the area where you don't really see people. I was dressed in tiny running shorts, a sports bra and an almost sheer tank top to keep my hydration belt from chafing. And there was a possibility of rain, so I'd left my phone at my house and had nothing on me besides a waterproof watch. This is rare, because I always bring my phone, but I was really familiar with this area and I'd run there so many summers without feeling threatened that I didn't feel a need to. So I was about an hour into my run on a small forest road, drenched in sweat when I heard a car approaching. I kept more to the side of the road and an old Ford pickup passed me by. It suddenly stopped. It backed up to me. The driver rolled the window down and I figured they were lost or something. The driver was an overweight, overheated guy in his late 50s or thereabouts. He didn't look especially creepy though. "Hi," he said, and nothing else. I was kinda starting to feel weird because he kept staring at me, so I asked him if I could help him with anything. Then he kinda started small talk with me, like where are you from, how old are you, etc. I was seriously starting to get creeped out, and I was in the middle of my run and started running again. He then slowly drove next to me with the window open, just commenting on everything from my body to how it seemed like it was going to rain soon. He then offered me a ride back home because it would be a shame if I got wet. I said that I liked running in the rain, that was true, and that I was already almost home and my dad was waiting. He kept asking several more times and I started to completely panic in my head. I was this close to jumping into the forest and running as hard as I could, but then suddenly, a deer jumped across the road ahead and I took my chance. When I went off the road, he actually stopped the car, opened the door and shouted loudly, "Come on, I really want to give you a ride." I think I made a personal sprint record going down that deer path. I also got completely lost, and I ended up with a 3-hour-long jogging hike back before I got to my home. I now never go on runs without my phone, and I always have live GPS tracking on, as well as a waterproof case on my phone. Don't Give Strangers Rides, no matter how sad their story is, by Zanzibar So Live. One night at about 6:30, my friend and I went to the local grocery store downtown. We went in and got our groceries, no problem. The parking lot has limited spaces because of downtown parking issues, but we had a 30-minute limit and only used it for 20 getting the groceries, so we decided to go over to the game shop next door. A few minutes later, we headed back to my car. It was early November and freezing out. The parking lot was crowded with other cars trying to back out, so we were waiting on them, and then a woman appeared at the passenger side window. That's where my friend was sitting. Now, my friend is a male to female transgender, so the hormones she takes tend to make her look 16 instead of 25. I also looked pretty young for my age. I know it's typical for downtown homeless people to pick out young looking girls to ask for money, etc. So we roll down the window and this woman is frantic. She's waving a cell phone around, asking if we can give her a ride to the bus transfer point in the south side of town. That's about a 15-minute drive away. She tells us that she missed her bus number or whatever it was, and that she has to get to that transfer point now because if she doesn't, they're going to take her kids away from her. I said, no ma'am, because first, she was looking scary enough in general, but second, it's not our responsibility to be a taxi service to every person with a sad story. She asked us again, begging really, saying, they're going to take my kids away, please help me. I look at my friend and she just gave me an eye roll and shook her head. Then the woman, quote, answered her phone and started talking to somebody like, yeah, I know, I'm trying to get a ride here, please don't take them. She was obviously lying. We could see her phone screen and it wasn't on an active call. At this point, I was done with her and apologized again and started to back out. My friend rolled up her window and we tried to back out, but the lot was so small and there was also another car that we had to wait for. The woman was following our car saying please, and then tried to open the back passenger door and started pounding on my window. I was like, hell no. No way am I going to let this crazy woman into my car like that. Luckily it was locked and we could just drive away and book it back home. On the drive home my friend was like, yeah, the bus she missed doesn't exist. There's not even a bus stop there. It runs a complete different route. I'm just thankful that she didn't come up with a good enough story and I wasn't in a good enough mood to let her play off my kindness that day. Encounter with an Infamous Serial Killer by That's a Paddlin'. In the late 70s, my uncle was studying at the University of Chicago. After a morning class, he decided that he would hitchhike back to Lincoln Park on the north side instead of paying for a taxi. A man drove up to him in a Plymouth Satellite and offered to pick up my uncle for a ride. The man looked normal and seemed friendly enough. Light-hearted even, so my uncle just got into the car. They then started driving towards Lake Shore Drive. However, once they got there, the man drove south on the lake instead of going north towards Lincoln Park. My uncle told the man that he was going the wrong way, and instead of turning around and heading north, the man looked at my uncle. He put his hand on his knee and said, "No, you're coming with me," and smiled at him darkly. My uncle froze in panic. A little bit later, they hit some traffic. My uncle quickly unlocked the passenger door and ran away without looking back. A year or two later, on a cold December day, my uncle was having coffee in a cafe with my future aunt when he caught something on the news that made his blood run cold. He saw the same man that had picked him up on that road that day. He had been arrested for the suspected rape and killing of over 20 young men and boys. The man on the television was John Wayne Gacy. He also removed the passenger side door handle. That was to prevent the people he picked up from escaping. Hey, You Wanna Ride? By Tactical Augra. This actually happened to my wife. When I first met my wife, she was living alone in a studio apartment near her work in Garden Grove, CA. She is a very independent person and never had a problem with any of her neighbours. Being young, single and living in OC. She didn't have a car and wouldn't take public transportation either. Now, every day on her walk to and from work, she passed by a bunch of townhomes and would sometimes near hear catcalls or rude comments in Spanish from the guys that lived there. She never really thought anything of it, and she went on about her way. That was until one day, a truck pulled up alongside her and a Hispanic guy asked if she wanted a ride. She refused, but the guy got out and tried to drag her into his truck. She was able to escape and run to work since she lived less than a block away. She reported it to the police, who informed her that the townhomes that she passed every day on the way to and from work were actually halfway houses for rapists and pedophiles. They said that that guy had probably been watching her for some time before attempting the abduction. From then on, she was able to get a ride from one of her co-workers and never walked that way again. I Accepted a Ride When I Shouldn't Have by Jay Stance. I used to do a lot of hitchhiking as a young teen. This was when I was around 13 or 16. I never had any issues. I had a few men hit on me, but they backed off when I didn't reply to what they were doing, so it was okay. When I was 16, I got into a huge argument with my sisters and decided to walk from Corvallis to Monmouth, Oregon. It's about a 45-minute drive, and this was at 4 AM. Stupid, I know. Anyway, I was walking along and a car pulled up outside of a convenience store parking lot and sped off. About half a block later, it flipped a U-turn and pulled up beside me. It was a young dude, probably mid-20s. He was smoking a cigar and listening to Guns N' Roses. He seemed really nice and trustworthy. He asked me if I needed a ride, and I asked him if he was a rapist or serial killer. I always did this as a joke before getting in. He laughed and said no. But if I were, do you think I'd really tell you? I said that's a good point and hopped in and told him where I was heading. He agreed to drive me the entire way, and I got really excited as I wasn't looking forward to the walk. He needed to go and get some gas before we left town though, so he headed towards a gas station not more than 5 minutes later, and then there were suddenly flashing lights right behind us. He said he was worried because his license was expired, so I decided just to leave. The cop then stopped to ask me my age. I lied and said I was 18 and gave my sister's name and birthday. He informed me because that the man I was riding with was a predatory sex offender who seeked underage girls and used weapons and violence to assault them. I panicked and split. A block later, the cop stopped me and asked me if I was ready to be honest with them. I was, and they called my sister to pick me up while I waited. I was handcuffed in the back of a cop car. After that night, I never hitchhiked again. I just wanted to give you a lift to the main road by Compart 23. This happened to me when I was about 10 or 11. In my country, it's normal for elementary schools to have soccer tournaments for the kids in the mostly last 2 grades of elementary. I decided I was going to support my kids by myself in my grade since I had a few good football players on the team and obviously I wanted them to win. I head over there on my bike, and as I'm heading over there, it started to rain really hard. It was basically a tropical rainstorm. We had some bad rain before, but never like this. So being the introvert that I am, I decided I was going to hang out by myself at the intersection that was near the field where the tournament was being held. So I was waiting there when, all of a sudden, a white van stops in front of me. I can see because the lights have turned red. I then see that a guy who's 30ish I think, with blonde hair and a very friendly face, looks at me and rolls down his window and calls out to me. He said to me that he wants to take me to the main intersection, which was about 200 meters away. That was because it was raining so hard and he didn't want me to get wet. This was wrong because I was already soaked. I instantly got a gut feeling about this and that something was off. I remembered feeling really torn on one side because part of me wanted to go with this guy to be nice, but the other part could tell that something just wasn't right. So I politely declined his offer, but he kept on asking me and I kept on declining, and I started to back away from his van. The light then turned green and he said okay and drove off. I thought that maybe this was the last that I was going to see of him. Then about 5 or 8 minutes later, the same white van stops in front of me again. The guy rolls down his windows and asks me if I'm sure that I don't want a lift. He was just going to drive me to the main intersection and was going to put my bike in the back of his van. I was really scared at him saying this. I then said thank you again and started heading towards the nearest gas station. That's because I knew there would be people there. Since I was scared, I waited for about 10 minutes at the gas station before I quickly jumped on my bike and then went full speed towards a hill. I was very close to the field now and there were about 1,000 people down there. I never saw that guy again. Even to this day, I can still see this guy's face in my memory. It seems so friendly and nice. I'm probably never gonna know if his intentions were right, but it just felt really off, especially after he returned for a second time. I also wonder what he would have done to other children that may have been more receptive to him, since he seemed like such a genuinely nice and friendly guy. I'm lucky to have been born by Hooch McDaniels. Okay, so let me start by saying that my dad is a character. All of his friends loved him growing up because he could entertain you just by talking to him. This attitude is what initially led to me questioning the legitimacy of this story for a long time. Now that I'm a bit older though, I can tell this one cuts deep every time we make him tell it. Usually, he talks in a very upbeat and active tone, but if ever my brothers or I ask him to recite the story, his tone completely changes. It's as if the colour just rushes from his face. It's obvious he doesn't enjoy talking about it. Okay, now to the story. He was about 18 at the time. From the pictures he seemed like an athletic, approachable teen. He was living in the grey/whiting area of northwest Indiana. Sometime later in the evening, my dad, who's been a smoker for roughly 50 years of his life, decides to hitchhike to his local convenience store. He's had a knack for talking about places or events as if you were there. It's an odd thing to do, considering the shop was only a couple of miles away from his house. So eventually, a truck pulls up to the side of the road. It was a baby blue pickup truck to be exact. Apparently, there were 2 men in the truck, probably in their late 40s or so. Pretty normal looking to him. He said that the driver was a bit burly and sort of looked like Jackie Glenson. The truck was only a 3-seater, so the men in the passenger seat had to move over to the middle. No words were spoken, apart from the driver asking him where he was going. This didn't strike my father as odd, so he proceeded to sit in silence, not suspecting anything. Suddenly, out of nowhere, one of the guys randomly burst into laughter. Now, according to my father, this wasn't any ordinary laughter whatsoever. It was just more sinister, if that makes sense. Surely enough, the driver then looks at my father with what he claimed was the devil's eyes, now chiming in with the laughter. As you can suspect, they started to take a different route. My dad knew that they weren't heading anywhere near the desired destination. He was trying to play it cool, wait for his chance. Luckily, a couple of minutes later, they finally hit a red light. The driver slowly crept his arm across the cabin and starts caressing my dad's neck. I guess his fight or flight kicked in, and a sudden surge of adrenaline came about. He unlocked the door and the bolts out without even looking back. He then said he hid near a local church and watched as they driven around looking for him. Some years later, my dad was watching the news when the mugshots of the men popped up on the screen. His heart sunk. The man was undoubtedly the same man who picked him up hitchhiking. That man was John. Wait. God, is it gonna be him every time? You couldn't have guessed it. That man was John Wayne Gacy. For the third time in a row. I still struggle to pronounce that last bit though. It's Not the Police by Boom Roasted. So basically, one night about 2 years ago, me and two of my girlfriends were driving home from getting Mexican food. We saw red and blue flashing lights behind us. Obviously assuming that it was the police, Amy, who was driving, didn't feel safe pulling over where we were, considering it was the middle of the night and the streets we were on had very little lighting, so she slowed down but continued on. Ashley eventually come to a conclusion that it couldn't have been a real police car behind us because it looks more like a crappy old car. The car then passed us and sped up and passed in the opposite lane. We then decided to dial 911, and when she called the dispatcher, she confirmed that there were no squad cars in our current location. She told us to stay on the phone and somebody was coming over right away. Then the car tried cutting us off and passing again. Finally, a real police car came. We pulled over, but the other car sped off and was chased by the real police car. We never found out what actually happened or who they were. Lock Your Car Doors While Driving by Sophie's Mummy 7. I'm oddly a target for creepy people. I'm only 4'11" and female, so that may be why. About a month ago, I was at a pharmacy filling out a prescription. I have central pain following a stroke I had in my early 20s. I can walk, but the brain damage causes burning throughout my entire body. Due to this, I'm on morphine and seen by a specialist as well as go to a hospital. I dropped off my prescription and waited. I noticed that there was a guy behind me standing way too close. He could hear everything I said. I sat down and tested my blood pressure. I then noticed him walking around in the aisles by me. I thought he was waiting too. They then called my name 20 minutes later, and I didn't see him leaving the store either. I then went off to my car and kind of forgot about it. I immediately locked my doors due to the feeling of paranoia. I stopped to the first stop sign, and out from behind the tree jumps the same guy. In one motion he was from out behind the tree and was grabbing my passenger side door handle. It was locked. He seemed as shocked as I was, and then he tried to grab the other side door. I started screaming and put my hand on my horn and sped away. Other cars were also honking. I then saw him run. I drove until I saw a cop car sitting at a gas station. He took my information and drove to the stop sign and asked me to follow. I couldn't see the guy anywhere. The police officer said it happened last week to an elderly woman, so he needed to find out who it was. I was just really lucky. Always lock your car doors. Girl Ted Bundy by Moomin Goober. I live in a block of flats in England, and I was on my way literally 3 minutes down the road to my local pub. I was meeting my boyfriend and his brother there as I had just finished work and were on the train back home. My boyfriend had already rung me saying that they would be about 10 or 15 minutes. I'd been sent down there early to grab a decent seat near a TV as the English rugby was on. Anyway, I'm walking down the road looking at my phone when I suddenly hear a woman shout out, Miss, hello, miss." I remembered this woman vaguely waving in my direction. I look up, and there's this 25 or 8-year-old with a massive box at her feet. She's now waving me over to her. Me, being stupid, I went over to see what her problem was. "Miss, can you help me take this box round to my car at the corner? It's really too heavy." The woman is smiling while pointing at the box. Now, as soon as she said this, a thought come across my mind. I'm a small girl myself. Why would she be asking me and not some men? Does she really think that I could lug this massive box with her? "Sorry, I'm busy," and I tried to brush it off while turning away. "Please, I'm desperate. I have to get home to my kids. You need to help me, miss. It's too heavy." She's now yelling at me while squatting trying to lift it. I was really starting to get annoyed at her at this point. "Look, lady, my boyfriend and his brother are gonna be here any minute now. They can help you with this box. I don't know why you yell at me like this, and I'm only a small girl on my own. Why don't you ask some of the men in the street? I'm busy." Yes, I did feel bad for saying this to her, but alarm bells were ringing in my mind. I couldn't understand why she asked me. There were so many men on that street literally queuing up to use cash machines and just walking past. The woman then scowled at me. She gave me pure evils. She pushed her lips out and took her phone out. I continued to make my way to the pub. I was 2 shops away and I could clearly see one of the regulars outside smoking. I then turned round to get one last look at her. I could see that she had very simply picked up the box and placed it on her shoulder. She then proceeded to walk down that alley. Stay in School by Waste of Paint 4. When my auntie was a teenager back in the 70s, she and a few friends had skipped school one day. The group of girls wanted to get across town, which usually takes a couple of hours by foot. That's because we lived in a rural area and none of them had a car at the time. Being young, naive, and unaware of the danger, my auntie and her friends decided to hitchhike home. After a while of walking and trying to flag down cars, a man then stopped to pick up the young girls. My auntie said that the man was very handsome and had a great smile. He was as sweet as could be, and she and her friends got into the car. He then started driving them to their destination. He gave her a smile and nodded and continued on his way. I'm not too sure how much time had passed, but she said she was watching the news 1 hour after noon, and she then saw that familiar face. There was a man who had given her and her friends the lift home. He was arrested for the raping and murdering of a large number of young women. His name was Ted Bundy, and my aunt never hitchhiked again. They Called Him the Clown Killer by Susan Simmons. Let me start off by saying that this is not my tale. Believe whatever you want to, but I know that my dad wouldn't make this up. This is a story my dad has told and retold several times throughout the years. It's just as creepy now as it was the first time that I heard it, so here it goes. It was the early 1970s in Des Plaines, Illinois, back when it was not uncommon to hitchhike. My dad and his uncle were enjoying doing this. They were quite the adventurers. They were both pretty young in their early teens. They had just gone fishing, and then they made their way back to a nearby coffee shop parking lot in search of a ride to try and get home. A middle-aged man then stopped to pick them up. There was nothing really striking about this guy. He just looked like a normal person, so they got into the car with him. My dad sat in the passenger seat while my uncle sat in the middle back seat. Everything was fine. That was until the driver reached his arms towards the back of the car and put his hands on my uncle's knee. My dad's creepometer sounded right away. As soon as they come to the stoplight, my dad got out of the car, took his brother by the arm and got the hell out of there. Now fast forward a few years. It's 1978 and my dad catches a glimpse of a familiar face in the Chicago newspapers. It's the man who picked them up a few years back. The article states that This man was arrested after police found 33 teenage males buried in various places. It was including a crawl space. This sick man would find teenage boys wherever he could, rape, torture and kill them. His name was John Wayne Gracie. Needless to say, I'm happy that my dad reacted as quick as he did. My dad and uncle were undoubtedly about to be this sick man's next victims. God knows what could have happened to them had my dad not reacted the way he did. Wrong Car at the Train Station by Snelsig. I went to see my friend Jay in the suburbs, and we wanted to take the last train home to the city where I lived. It was past 11 PM, but I don't remember the exact time. He dropped me off in front of the station in his green estate car and left. Nothing unusual. While I was on the platform, I was told by a couple of teenagers that the trains had been cancelled due to a suicide on the line. This was confirmed by the announcement screen on the platform. The station was unmanned at that time of night. Being a student, a taxi was out of the question, so I called Jay to ask him to come back and drive me home. He said he would only be a few minutes and was around the corner. A few minutes pass and a green estate car arrives and parks in front of the station. I do not hesitate. I open the passenger door and climb in. I'm puzzled. Why does Jay have little plastic bags filled with lace on the dashboard? That wasn't there earlier. Why does he have a machete stuck between the passenger seat and his seat? I look up to ask these questions, and why is this guy not my friend, and why is he staring at me like that? I snap out of it. I think I have the wrong car. Him. I think you do. Me. My friend is just round the corner, he's gonna pick me up. You have the same car. He then locks the doors, thankfully. Jay then arrives at the point. He passes us, parks and gets out of his car. Jay is big and does boxing, and the guy next to me sees it. The doors click open quickly. I bolt out of the car and run to Jay. He shouts at me to get in his car and drive. He doesn't ask me any questions and we drive off. Once I calmed down, he told me that he got out of his car because he could see a bunch of youngsters approaching the exit of the station and they had baseball bats. He was wondering if I was in any kind of trouble. Jay thinks the guy locked me in the car to protect me from the young guys. I'm not so sure of that. I'm just glad he came back when he did, so I never had to find out. Be vigilant in car parks and parking lots by Forest95. Last winter I was shopping in a huge shopping centre in London with my sister. She works at one of the retailers. It was time for her to start her shift, so we said goodbye and I headed to the car park to drive home. The car park is a huge underground lot and it's dimly lit. With it being winter, it's dark in London by about 4 PM. There were plenty of parked cars around, but nobody else was around, so I'm walking over to my car listening to echoing footsteps searching for my key. I get into my car, put the gear into reverse and was about to reverse out, but there was some white paper on the back of my window. It was completely blocking my view. I knew that this wasn't there before, so I just continued on like I was normally and just was about to put it into drive. I then looked back and I could see that the back door of a van was open with a foreign looking man just waiting and staring at me. I shot out of that car park before anything could happen. On my way home, I called my sister and told her about what happened. She reported it to her manager and it escalated to security, but nothing ever came of it. I don't know if he would have actually done anything, but I've heard lots of stories of kidnappings taking place like this. Just please remember to be extra vigilant.